Hello, and welcome again to another evening of Equipping Women. Tonight, I've got a good friend of mine and a wise woman that is going to join us tonight as we talk about suffering. But before we launch into it, I really want you to just get to know Billee just a little bit. Billee and Joe, how long have you guys been at Buck Run now?
Almost 7 years.
Almost 7. The funny story that leads up to you guys coming to Buck Run, I don't know if you'll remember this, the details I've got etched in my brain forever, but you guys were renting because you were moving here to Frankfurt because
Right.
of Joe's job, right?
Right.
And you were going to rent a house for a season, and you were going to rent from my kids. And so uh, I think you found it on
Craigslist.
Craigslist.
Yeah.
Okay. And at that time, there were like crazy things happening with people
Yes.
on Craigslist. So Seth called me and he said, "Hey, this guy's wanting to come by and look at the house. Can you run over there and show it to him?" And I said, "What's his name?" And he says, "Joe Butcher." Well, then I'm going, "Oh, okay, that's a little, that's unnerving." So I remember I called Zach Thurman, who was our associate pastor of youth and other things here. And I said, "Hey, I'm meeting this guy," I thought at the time, at Seth's house to show him, just in case anything's like crazy or uncomfortable or something. Will you just come park outside?" And then Joe shows up, and I think you guys were in the car, and you had a new baby. You had a little
Yes.
baby and a carrier. And I was like, "Okay, we're all good." And from that, I invited you guys to church, and it
Right.
was just of the Lord that Zach came over there because Zach's made you guys feel welcome,
Right.
talked about the youth program and all that stuff. And
We never went anywhere else.
no kidding.
No, we came to Buck Run and that was it.
Well, man,
So,
I am delighted. I am so delighted that the Lord moved you to Frankfurt, led you to that house to rent. I mean, He's just so good in those ways. And Billee and Joe work in our children's ministry.
yes.
Specifically, what do you guys do?
We were teaching the 3-year-olds together.
Okay, yeah, because now it's all
Yeah, and
crazy.
then Mel took Joe and he's working the door.
Okay, yeah, we
So,
call him the
yes.
enforcer or something like
Yeah,
that.
he's-
None shall pass,
Right.
unless they come.
You have to
through.
have that sticker.
That's right. Even I have to have
Yes.
that sticker, which
Yeah.
I appreciate. I like it because I've got grandchildren back there, and I
Yeah.
know if they're policing me, they're policing
Policing everybody.
So
Yeah.
that's a good feeling. Okay, so again, we're just grateful the Lord led you here, and He gifts the church, each church, with the right people at the right time. And man, He just sent you guys here for us, and I hope sent you here for you guys as well.
Yes.
And so you have spoken a couple of times and been an encouragement on the topic of suffering. And so tonight we've asked you if you would be willing to do that. The topic of suffering is challenging because nobody really wants to know about it, because then that means they're getting prepared and suffering's
Right.
going to come. But you and I both know that James says, when trials come, not if.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the suffering. Suffering's going to come in different ways and in different times in people's life. And while it's difficult to experience suffering, there's also a time of hope and growth in it. So let's just start again
Right.
with the very basics of what is our hope in time of suffering.
Our hope in suffering is that God is using that time to grow our lives and to make us more like Christ, and it creates an intimacy that we don't really get any other way.
This is true. You can't know what you haven't experienced in
Right.
some ways, and so you've given us a really good, helpful outline, and being able to. I love it when people alliterate things, because
Oh.
that, if they do, then typically I can remember it and hold on to it a little tighter. So. Let's just talk about our response to suffering too, and what should it be. So, you got to. I hate to use the word formula, but you have an outline, you have
Right.
a plan.
Have a
that
good
helps us
Baptist outline.
That's right. That's right. Is it 3 points even?
It is.
Okay, which is perfect. and
3
it's
C's
alliterate.
and 3 A's.
3 C's and 3
Yes.
A's. Okay, so let's go down. C number 1 is what?
First thing that can happen sometimes is that we want to control things. That we want to have a sense of control, or we want to make things happen outside of God's timing and God's will.
You have a good example of that happening?
I do. I use Sarah from in Genesis
That's
with
great.
Sarah and Abraham. Um, Sarah had been given this promise. Abraham had been given the promise of his descendants would outnumber the stars, but she was barren for years, and they couldn't conceive a child. And so she got a little tired of waiting and tried to take things into her own hands,
Try to control
tried to control what happened,
the.
and ultimately, that she regretted it immediately.
Yeah, it turns south.
Yes.
Really turns south really quickly in Scripture.
Yeah. And we can do that sometimes when we know that there's a promise or a good thing that's going to come, but we just don't want to wait for God's timing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and here's the thing: when we try to take control, we foolishly begin to think, that it's gonna bring contentment. If
Yeah.
I just control, if I can use it and control the outcome and control the circumstances a little more, then you foolishly are convincing yourself, if my circumstances were different, much different, I could be content.
Yes.
And I can't remember who said it. I wish I could give her, I know it was a female I was listening to, but I wish I could give her proper credit. But she said something to the effect of, if you cannot learn to be content in the circumstances that you are in, a change of circumstances, it will not be any easier to get content in a change of circumstances.
Right.
So it's like, some people go, well, if we lived in a different city, if I lived in a different house, whatever it is, and begin to manipulate, like you say, trying to gain control instead of just saying, this is what the Lord's sort of done here. So what would be a response then? You've got we answer with control. Would be a good response instead of control?
Adoration.
Adoration.
And so seeing God in his proper view, putting him in his proper place and putting us in our proper place, studying the attributes of God.
Like, let's just name off a couple now. I'm putting you on the spot here on the
Okay.
attributes of God. Sometimes I'll ask people, like, let's just talk about the attributes of God. And once I ask that question, your brain goes blank.
Yeah.
But we know there's like a trillion of them. We could never outname them. I mean, we'd exhaust it. But let's just you and I just right now try and think of some of those attributes of God that we can adore. You got one comes to your mind?
Well, he is sovereign
He is.
over everything,
Uh-huh.
and we are not.
Absolutely. He's creative.
Yes.
So, I mean, he can create life and the world through mere speaking it. And, I mean, you just look at the diversity of everything that exists in the universe, and
Right.
you just go, this is a God who's unlimited, which would be another thing we could praise him for, would be his limitlessness.
Right.
Anything else you can think of?
He is just.
He's just. And sometimes we don't like that way.
Right.
We want to be just toward other people, but it's you want a consistent judge in every scenario. So consistency of the Lord being a judge is a good thing. So adoration, studying the attributes. Anything else you think of in that?
We also have to learn what it means to surrender and to be in submission to God. When we give our life to Christ, we give our whole life, not just some of it, not just the parts that we're okay with.
Right.
We have to let him have control of all of it.
Yeah, and not just you did the two S's off at it, and not just
Yeah.
seasonally. So
Right.
surrender and submission,
Submission.
and it's not seasonal. Your whole life,
Yeah.
you are doing that, and I'm going to regress just a little bit and just talk. Suffering for humanity, for mankind, really is a lifelong process. It's not just something that you can expect to come either in your youth or in your married life or as you get older. I mean, I can look just across our congregation, and you can look at your friends and your family, and it shows up all throughout our lives.
Right.
There's some level of suffering that takes place.
I think that you had said the first time I had heard it is Elizabeth Elliot says that suffering is having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have.
And we're going to have that
So
all
that's
the days
all
of
of
our
us,
life.
yeah.
Yeah, every bit of it. I love Elizabeth Elliot. Don't you love her?
Yes.
Isn't she amazing? She's so hard and direct, but I like that kind of, I just say what I need to know so I can move on
Right.
with what I need to do. So surrender and submission, and that'll play out your whole life. And it's, I'm sure you've had the same challenge that I've had in the sense of, I, I will have suffered a season in my life, and by the end of it, I will have managed to surrender some things and to submit to some things and grow in it. But it doesn't mean that I figured it out, and that if suffering comes again, I'm not having to resubmit
Right.
and re-surrender those things, because in each scenario of suffering that comes up, don't you find that it's a different, I mean, oh, you surrender your whole heart to the Lord. You surrender your whole life to the Lord, but then there's emotional feelings
Right.
that you're going to have to surrender to the Lord.
And I feel like as I was writing these things out, I think they just keep coming up. And
Yeah.
the quicker I can identify them, the better.
Yeah, that's right. Today, I was walking around. I'm running actually, and I was running and I was praying, and man, I was just thinking, oh, I just need to surrender that to the Lord, because that just didn't gonna happen. And it's something that Elizabeth Elliot, it's something that I want that I cannot have
Yeah.
right now. And in the midst of all this, are you filled to the brim
Yes.
with a lot of things that you want that you cannot have? Like, you're given to hospitality.
Right.
I see that is
Thanks.
that is your gift. And I before all of this hit, I noticed how you were delighting in having people to your home and
Right.
making muffins and displaying it all, and just just using your gifts in that way. And suffering's just got a real broad scale. It's the, I say small things, and I don't mean to diminish
Right.
that, but it's small things like not having what you want, or wanting what you don't have, but getting something really awful that you don't want. And so that is, you have to figure out what in my will, what in my limited perspective am I just holding on to and not surrendering over
Yeah.
over to the Lord. And going back to your Sarah example and Hagar, that's exactly what she was, again, trying to take control instead of saying, Lord, I'm submitting this to you and I adore you. You're worthy of my adoration. So we got surrender and submission, and you got one more in that one.
Having a right fear of the Lord. Sometimes we bring things to a personal level just a little bit too much. And we want to make everything very casual.
Right.
And we're on the same level as God, and He should do what we want Him to do.
Right.
And
Right.
we forget that we should have a little bit of awe and trembling when we come before the Lord.
Absolutely. A healthy fear is a really, really good thing. And we don't like fear so much, though. And so we don't think that that's a good thing to place on the Lord. But a healthy fear of Him is recognizing He is God and you are not.
Right.
And so, all right, so our first C is control.
Right.
Let's move to the second C.
Okay, so the second C is comparison.
All right.
And that's when we take our joy and our worth and we kind of measure it by what others are getting, their gifts, and how their lives are going.
Yeah, you got a biblical example of that one?
I do. I have Rachel and Leah.
Okay, that's a good one.
I think they both spent their lives comparing to each other.
Right.
And
right.
as sisters
Yeah.
who,
Yeah.
who could outdo each other.
Yeah, there you got Mary and Martha. They're comparing what one person is doing as compared to the other one. But when we talk about this comparison thing, and I think this is really an important point, and I'm really glad that you brought that word to our attention, because I think we live in continual comparison. We're always
Yes.
looking at ourselves to that. And the problem with that is we can't fairly calculate any comparison, because there's no way we can know all the brokenness that person is either currently experiencing or has experienced.
Right.
And so we look at things like they're, I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram and Facebook. You
Yeah.
too? It's a good way to keep up with. But man, it is a device that I think brings on suffering because of comparison. And we're look at those. But, I've heard somebody describe it when people post on Facebook or they post on Instagram, they are given their highlight reel.
Right.
Well, you can't, and I appreciate people not putting all their nasty awful on there, don't you?
Yes.
Like, I don't want to, I honestly don't believe it would be very productive if people put on there all the problems that they've had in life. I would unfriend them more likely because I
Right.
don't need that. But I do find that I do this, and I know other women that I've talked to do that, is they look at that. So you can falsely assume, based on what we're seeing in people's life, or we see them at church, or we see them at work, or in our neighborhoods, or whatever, we can falsely assume that they have experienced kind of a suffering-free life, or
Right.
they're not suffering. I read a quote. I even posted it on my Facebook for that very reason. It says, um, just because they are carrying a heavy load well doesn't mean it's not heavy.
Right.
And so sometimes we will look at that and it will cause us to do that. I know from hearing your testimony somewhat that you have the sorrow and challenge and suffering of a fractured family, and that was in your youth, right?
Yes.
Do you mind saying just how old you were at that time?
No, actually, I was 20.
20 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, so your life turned upside down and around.
Right. And when I was 20, I had grown up a pastor's daughter. Mm-hmm. And my dad left the ministry and he left our family, and
Yeah.
there was never any closure to that. There was no reconciliation.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's just what I walk with.
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And so that's a load you don't
Yeah.
just unpack and leave it unpacked.
Right.
You have that where it shows up in your life and in your heart, and it will be a continual suffering until Jesus makes all things
That's
right.
right.
And then you've struggled with infertility.
We did. That's
So-
why my examples are all women in the Bible who
there
struggled
we
with
go.
infertility.
There we go. Well, that
Yes.
makes sense.
So we spent most of my 20s and 30s dealing with infertility. So 7 years to get pregnant with Natalie Joe, and then 7 more years for LMA. So we've had 2 children, and
Yeah. So how old is Natalie Joe now?
she turns 14 this month.
How exciting.
Yeah.
That's wonderful watching her grow, and it's sweet watching LMA. She's large and in charge, and
Yes, she is.
yeah, I love it. I love that you can see the distinctness of their personalities, and it's sweet doing it. But yeah, we all have suffering that shows up through our lives, and even if it's shown up, whether in our youth or in our 20s or 30s or whatever
Right.
time, again, it's something that you're going to wear. Like my mom was diagnosed early with Alzheimer's, and so we watched and cared for and experienced the very unique suffering that only Alzheimer's patients bring into the lives of their families.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly challenging. I know, again, the Lord doesn't waste a thing, and I've come to see that more and more, that He will bring back up those things that are sufferings in our life and not waste it, but use it to comfort somebody else or to be a blessing to somebody else, console other people. That's why when you look at those scriptures of those women who had a season of barrenness, that you can go, look how the Lord shows His goodness
Right.
as He blesses them in the ways that He does. And so, all right, so we've got comparison. So let's talk about now what's a good response. We talked about control, and the response to that was adoration, and then we've got comparison, and the response to that is what?
Appreciation.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yes, that turns our eyes off of other people and what they have and brings it on to what God has given us and what we do have in our lives.
Training yourself to see that. Some people think
Yes.
that's just like, that's a personality trait. You know, oh, that person's, they just so pleasant and they're grateful and blah, blah, blah. But that's really a discipline.
Right. And you can learn to do that
You
like
absolutely,
anything else.
absolutely. And one of the ways that I like it that you said that, that, you know, you tangibly practice gratitude. The way I practice it is I verbalize it. And so just internally thinking it, I work hard to make that part of my conversation and my dialect, not
Right.
just in my prayer to the Lord, but hopefully my prayer to people and my conversation with people. And I've heard you do that. I've heard you talk about the things you're grateful for, and that has a domino effect, don't you think?
I think it does.
I think it sort of causes other people to go, wow, you know, unless they're comparing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is where when somebody does a grateful thing, one of the best tools that instead of me going, well, look, she's getting to do this or she has that or fill in the blank, whatever it is, I can go, Lord, but listen, I'm so grateful that I have. You know, I've got a friend who is single. She's never been married, and she really would love to be married one day. That's really a desire of hers. And she and I both pray that the Lord would see fit to answer that prayer in her life. But what I have noticed is her life through the process of suffering, not having what she really wants. I have watched over the last couple of years, and I bet you if she watches this, she will identify, that's me she's talking about, that I have watched her over her life verbalize the gratitude of the things she does have. And I'm convinced that that has been the tool that has kept her from falling in that awful trap and cycle of comparison. And so just,
Yeah. I did not always walk through infertility well, and I can look back and know that.
yes,
But now that I look back, I think Joe and I had 7 years to begin our marriage.
yeah,
And
that's
who gets that?
right.
Not everybody gets that.
Right. And you've got a good, healthy marriage.
Yeah.
And I watch you adore him, and he's turned into like a smoker king or
Yes,
something
he is
now,
the
right?
grill master.
Yeah, during COVID, everybody's sort of doing their own little new
Yes.
experimental thing. I'm baking bread and cinnamon rolls, and so we're just growing in this in many ways.
Many ways. Yeah, he
because of
has
it.
kept us in.
Okay,
too.
so we've got tangible gratitude practice,
Right.
and
And just recognizing that every good gift comes from God.
yeah,
And just taking the time to not just say, I'm thankful for today, but to say, I'm thankful I drank a whole cup of coffee while it was still hot
yeah,
today.
small
Yeah.
things.
You know, I'm grateful we're having this conversation
Me
today. You know, just to pinpoint the, exactly what it is that you're thankful for and look for those small things. Some days it might be hard.
Right,
Some days it might be really hard to find something that you're grateful for. I know a lot of people are struggling
right,
now,
yeah,
but there's always something you can find.
right. I read. I can't remember what the statistics are, and people don't care about statistics anyway, other than to know it's off the charts right now. People having depression and anxiousness, and I think it was in the New York Times gave the numbers and stuff, and I just remember thinking, man, this really is a very, very difficult time, and trying to train yourself to have gratitude and to see the gifts that the Lord, the small gifts,
Right.
the small graces that the Lord's before you. And then you gave another one that's be the gift. Describe that.
Right. So it's kind of the same idea as pay it forward.
Okay.
Just
I
look
like
for
that.
something small that you can do for other people because you're not the only one who's suffering right now.
Right.
And so instead of looking at everything they have that you don't have, maybe meet a need that you can provide that they don't have.
Right.
Or just be an encourager, send
Right.
someone a card in the mail, a phone call,
Yeah.
a little gift.
Yeah, it does take your eyes off of you, and it, I mean, you get a blessing from being a blessing every time, and especially to those that maybe you just might have a little bit of struggle with in doing that. All right, so let's look at our final C.
Okay.
What's our final C?
Our final C is being consumed.
Okay.
And this is just when you lose the ability to find any joy in life because you are just so overcome with your circumstances or whatever it is that's going on.
I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen in people's lives. And, You know, it's strange because, like, in that moment, when somebody has hit the consumed level and they're overwhelmed in their joys, you know, been robbed, been gone, whatever, what I've recognized is they're not ready to even receive a good word, a word from the Bible,
Yeah.
you know, a word from God Himself. They're, because they've, they've hit the I'm consumed. Speaking to those people in that time is really, really challenging because they're not, you'd think they would be so receptive. But, you know, can you
Right.
identify that you
You've
push
almost
back?
just turned it off.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, you know, Bible talk, I don't want all that kind
Right.
of stuff. I don't want
Yeah.
somebody feeding that to me. So, which is exactly the thing you need, but it comes through a vehicle that you've already decided I'm going to be consumed
Right.
with this. And you know, there's a psalm that says, in His presence, there's fullness of joy. That really is true. But for me to say to you
Right.
in one of those moments, not saying that I wouldn't say it, because I don't know if I'd feel the responsibility to say it, but I don't know that everybody's very receptive
Right.
to to hear it. So before you get consumed is really what we want to do. So you got a biblical example of that,
I do, and that's Hannah,
Hannah?
who is usually the go-to when you're talking about infertility in the
Right.
Bible. But I think we get her story a little short because we usually wrap it up with Hannah wanted a baby, Hannah prayed for a baby, God gave Hannah a baby.
Right.
But we've missed those few verses at the beginning that talk about how she was just consumed with grief.
Yeah.
And the Bible says year after year, year
Right.
by year. So it wasn't a short term longing that she had. This was something for years
Right.
that was part of her life. And a lot of us are going to suffer long term.
Absolutely.
And if you aren't grounded in your faith, you're not going to be sustainable through that.
Do you know the only way you get long suffering? Do you know what the answer to that is? You suffer long.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't. There is no short. You know, if it wasn't long, you wouldn't have long suffering. You'd have short suffering.
Right.
You'd have temporal suffering, and all of us. That's Christ was long suffering, and His desire is to change us into His likeness. And one of those likenesses is He was long suffering. And aren't you grateful that He's long suffering?
Yes.
Because you would not be here, I would
No.
not be here, that He just suffered through my rejections and still does, you know,
Yep.
me going on and living my own life. So, all right, those are great examples. What then would you say would be the answer or a response to being consumed?
Application. So applying the biblical disciplines that we know we ought to be doing.
Yeah, and don't you think you sort of have to have those prepared for when suffering
Right.
comes? Don't you think that's a helpful thing?
I
Because
do.
you're not going to want me coming up and telling you those things. So just sort of anticipating.
Right.
I need
You
to-
cannot feed on, Instagram quotes and worship music and, hearing a sermon every 3 weeks and think that you're going to be able to suffer long term.
No, you can't.
It won't sustain you long.
No. Yeah, it will irritate you. That's
Yeah.
what it will. It will
Yeah.
cause you.
It
like-
soothes you for the day, maybe, but it's not going to be what you need to really thrive through it.
all right, and what else?
That's it, that we need our prayer life and our scripture study and to build community.
All right, so how has community benefited you in your suffering?
I think community is one of the hardest steps to take, especially if you're suffering, if you're hurt, if you're broken. For some reason, we Christian women want to smile and say, no, I'm okay. I don't need your help with this.
Right.
Everything's perfect. I'm good.
Right.
We don't want to show any weakness. And so stepping out and taking your messy life into a messy life with someone else gets messy.
It does.
It just
Yeah.
it just is. But it's probably the last step that Joe and I have been working on the last couple years was like we really need people around us. We need community. I wish we had done it sooner,
Yeah.
but our community group has
Isn't
been
it
great.
sweet?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's funny because on the front end, you think it's going to cost you and you're going to have to give up some
Yeah.
stuff. And what you receive is far greater than what you're you ever calculated
Right.
giving up. And so, I mean, you really do need community in suffering. You need to
You do.
let somebody come alongside you and help you bear that. Okay, well, as we close, I've added some more C's. And
Okay.
here's what I would do: communion with Christ cannot compare.
Right.
You know, that passage of scripture where it talks about Paul's in Philippians, where he just says the fellowship of his sufferings. That there are some ways, like you said at the beginning, you can't come to know some things about the Lord without having experienced certain things. Like there are ways you won't know him intimately until you have to lean into him intimately. But then I'll close with this passage, Romans 8:18, and I love it. It says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." That's a good word, isn't it?
It is.
That is a good hope to build your suffering on. As deep and as dark as sometimes it can feel, it's still going to pale in comparison to the glory that's to be revealed.
Right.
I'm sorry you have suffered, but I am grateful that you've allowed the Lord to use that in your life and to see fruit in that and now sharing that fruit. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you,
Thank
Billy,
you.
for coming. And I know she was nervous, but
Yes.
you let up, you relaxed. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time, next Thursday night on Equipping Women. Bye.